Alrighty, well, it's 10 o'clock, so I think we'll get going. Welcome back to the Calgary ED COVID rounds updates. We took a break last week, but we are happy to be back. And I'm just going to start off as usual with introducing Dr. Eddie Lang, our head, who will do our leadership update. Eddie, thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Thanks to our organizers, and amazing thank you to all of our leadership teams across the zone who have been keeping us informed and organized. Quick update on where things stand now in terms of the pandemic and what's next. If you have any doubt, this curve, I think, confirms that we are clearly on the downslope of this problem, at least as far as acute care hospitals are concerned. ICU numbers are down to 4 for the Calgary zone, and we are slowly ticking down on the number of patients in hospital. So I think it's quite certain that at least for the next few months, we are going into the maintenance and the vigilance phase of the COVID pandemic. I think in the next slide, I'd like to highlight some of the effects that the last 12 weeks have had on ED operations. And I think they're quite remarkable. Even though we're under the strain of PPE and isolation rooms, and the leadership teams are working really hard to optimize flow through the ED so that that is addressed, there has still been, if you compare the orange curve, which is the last 12 weeks, the last 10 weeks, to the same period of time last year, we're doing remarkably well from an operations ED flow perspective. Although our volumes are still down a little bit, they're catching up, but the support of the consultant services in getting patients admitted is remarkably quicker. The length of stay that patients are staying in Emerge before they get their bed upstairs has dropped significantly. We're meeting all of our CAPE CTAS targets. Our EMS crews are offloading in record time, and our left without being seen has dropped as well. So this is almost like an operational honeymoon. It's multifactorial, but I think it's critical that we do everything in our power to maintain these gains. And that takes me to the next slide. So what we want to leverage as much as possible is to find out in terms of the improvements that we have seen, and they have come as a result of multiple innovations, collaborations, better communication with the acute care services in our hospital. We are looking at these 7 themes for what has transpired in the last 8 weeks that has improved our ability to deliver care, catalog them, quantify them, get feedback on them, and then, if appropriate, make the case for why these changes need to persist. So of course, top of the list is the fact that hospital capacity has been improved, partly because of reduced surgeries, but there's actually more to it than that. We've seen fewer volumes for sure, but the anecdotal experience is that the patients that are coming in seem to have a higher likelihood of pathology and more likely to have abnormal tests that confirm the disease. We are, of course, seeing an uptick, a serious uptick in our mental health strain, and most of our delayed to admissions at the moment are related to mental health patients. We're seeing better coordination with the community, more direct admissions, which allow bypass of the ED, a completely transformed relationship with our long-term care, and of course the ability to really keep us all protected with the enhanced IPC, and then the role that virtual care is having in the environment. So what I want to make a plea for in the last minute of this update is to really secure these gains, we need help. The department needs your help. If one of these areas is of interest to you, is something that you're passionate about, we need the help with measuring it, writing it up, recording the data, getting input from others, describing the innovation, so that we can make sure that we don't slip back to the old normal and that we really go for a new normal. And that is why I named this a brief 5-minute update with that title, looking towards the new normal, not the old normal. So that's my 5-minute update. Please feel free to reach out to me offline if you are interested in picking and helping out with one of these themes. And I will pass things back to Stuart, our moderator.
Thanks, Eddie. And a big shout out to our leadership for all the work they're doing in the background, keeping things going, and hopefully keeping track of our improved performance. So just to get onto the agenda, we've had the leadership update from Eddie. Next, we're going to have the wellness update from Dr. Kelsey McLeod. And then we're going to jump into the clinical side with Dr. Chris Bond and Dr. Catherine Crowder. And then into the Q&A, which will be moderated by Sean. Just a note about the Q&A, as you may recall, please enter your questions into the Q&A section. The chat box is for comments, but the Q&A is where we'll get most of the information. If you see a question that has that you were going to ask, just hit the up and it'll upgrade in level of importance. And then we'll address all the questions at the end of the Q&A and then wrap it up. And so with that, I'm just going to hand over to Kelsey McLeod for the wellness update. Kelsey?
Great. Thank you, Stuart. Hello, everyone. I'm Kelsey. I'm one of the emerge docs at South Health. So this week, I'm going to be focusing on a specific and practical approach to combating stresses that many of us may be feeling. So this is a discussion that we've had in our wellness group, and we've talked about what some of these stresses might be. There may be fears around reopening. There may be concerns about our PPE, and it may be stressful for some people to watch a provincial government strategically attempt to decimate or decimate a publicly funded healthcare system while attacking physicians on Twitter. Just to name a few things that might be going through some people's heads. So one simple way to combat the impact these stresses can have on our physical and mental health is gratitude. This doesn't mean we should ignore important issues, but it's an attempt to not let them have a significant negative impact on our lives. If we can go to the next slide. So there is science behind gratitude. Emmons and McCall found that the act of writing down 5 things you're grateful for once a week increases subjective well-being. It has a positive impact on how we think our week is going, how we think our next week will go, and how we are physically feeling. Interestingly, it also increases the number of hours of exercise we will do in a week. This gratitude can even extend from our own subjective well-being and improve our personal relationships, romantic relationships, and our relationships at work. Especially in our current context, the act of writing down this gratitude may be even more powerful, because having this as a point of reference may be a good way to prime ourselves to remember gratitude when we are feeling less valued. As a quick plug, this information is an adaptation of a section of a free online course offered by Yale called The Science of Wellbeing. It's offered on Coursera.org, and I'll ask if the link can maybe be put online, but if not, then I can get it included in our next week's newsletter. If we can go to the next slide. So, in the spirit of gratitude, I would like to extend a heartfelt and enormous thank you to all of my colleagues and leaders across the city. There are so many people who have stepped up and taken on extra work to help us prepare for this pandemic. So to our leaders, those involved in grand rounds, those involved in SIM, our IT gurus, countless people who are putting themselves out there and advocating, and so many people behind the scenes who do not get the praise that they deserve. Thank you so much for what you're doing. Thank you to everyone for showing up, and for being a part of our community. Over the last month, I've been collecting thank you videos, and we have some personalized videos that we will be sending out in the next couple of weeks. But I wanted to share one today that's an homage to everyone who is helping to run our departments. And a special thank you to Aaron Peterson from the PLP for doing all of the hard work and putting this together. So we'll play the video now, and then after that, I will send it over to Chris Maverick Bond, who will be giving our clinical COVID update. Thanks. Enjoy.
Pandemic, who would have guessed? But wow, I have been impressed with our zone leadership. Thank you.
To our site chiefs and our merge leadership group,
we just want to say thank you for all of your hard work and planning and keeping us all safe and informed during this pandemic. Thank you.
To the entire administrative team, thank you so much for keeping us safe and keeping us on track throughout these uncertain times.
Hey, a big thank you to our fierce emerge leaders. I really felt supported and quite prepared during this tough time. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you, leadership. We appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you for stepping up, for your extraordinary efforts to keep us informed and safe, and for leading the way. We really appreciate everything that you do.
thank you so much to my colleagues for all the support during these COVID times. They're tough times for everybody.
So overall, thanks to everybody in the Calgary zone for their work preparing us for the COVID pandemic as best as possible.
I just wanted to say thank you for all of your time and expertise in making sure that we're all safe and prepared for the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, just wanted to say thank you very much for all your efforts that you're doing during COVID-19. Keep it up.
Thank you.
You've orchestrated a team that's ready to face the worst of the pandemic head on. We've all been eating, sleeping, and breathing COVID. Just one thing though, I'm feeling a little inundated and immersed, and I'm feeling a little strange and unusual lately. Hopefully you'll find it in your heart to give me a few days off so I can get my head back in the game. Thanks for everything that you do.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate your hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for keeping our family safe.
Good morning, everyone. It looks like you're all clearly the elite, the best of the best. The top 1% will make you better. Today, I'll be talking to you about forming the suspected or confirmed COVID positive patient. You knew it, you broke it, and broke a major rule of containment. Apologies in advance for this having bullet points. I would never under normal circumstances, but this is a talk based purely on legalities and form completion, and I worry about audio quality with virtual rounds. To make up for this, I have a sweet background to keep you entertained. I've clearly had a bit of a misspent youth, and after watching Top Gun 200 or 300 times and sending countless letters to Jerry Bruckheimer, Tom Cruise, and Michael Bay, RIP, they finally agreed to make me a Top Gun 2. And they kindly made the release date June 26th, which also happens to be my birthday. But then COVID came along and pushed the release date back to Christmas. So in the words of Iceman, COVID is bullshit. Thanks to those of you who sent me questions prior to the rounds. I responded to all of them yesterday, and hopefully they are now clarified. Next slide. Our objectives today are to define the apprehension, detention, and isolation processes and forms, explain when to use these forms, and to respond to your questions. Please put the questions into the Q&A, and Sean will moderate at the end after Catherine's talk. Judy McDonald, one of the medical officers of health, and Jana Sasaki from AHS Legal will be here to answer your questions as well. Next slide. The first and most important thing are the definitions. The forms that we use for this are from the Public Health Act and not the Mental Health Act. And there are two critical forms: a certificate of a medical officer of health and an isolation order. The certificate of the medical officer of health was previously a Form 3 of the Public Health Act and can only be completed by an MOH. This is in order to apprehend a non-compliant patient not already in hospital. The second is an isolation order, which is completed by an emergency physician or an attending physician. And this is completed on patients who are already in the emergency department or admitted. Under very rare circumstances, the medical officer of health form will be performed on patients in the emergency department, primarily for patients refusing testing or swab results that are pending. The Mental Health Act, on the other hand, still has the Form 1, which is used for its usual indications. Next slide. If a certificate from the medical officer of health is completed and the patient is brought to the emergency department, they are now detained for a maximum of 7 days from the date of hospital admission. And we do not have to complete any other forms unless the patient remains non-compliant with isolation requirements, in which case we complete an isolation order, or there's mental health, drug abuse, etc., that necessitates a Form 1 is completed. Next slide. This is what an isolation order looks like. This will be the only form that will be new to you. It should be on SharePoint. It actually is on SharePoint at FMC already and will be on SharePoint at the other sites within the next few days. It's also accessible by our unit clerks. In all cases, if the patient is voluntary, this form does not apply. You try to convince the patient to stay in the hospital first and can discuss ASIS or hospitalist admission. However, if the patient is involuntary, there are 3 scenarios. The first, the patient is COVID positive in the emergency department and will not or cannot isolate. In this case, you complete this isolation order form. The second scenario is a patient is suspected COVID and cannot or will not isolate. In this case, you need to call the medical officer of health on call and discuss whether an isolation form should be completed. The third case is the patient is suspected COVID and cannot, will not isolate, and you cannot reach the MOH for some reason. This should be a very rare and exceptional circumstance. However, if it does occur and you have an extremely high index of suspicion for the patient being COVID positive, 2 physicians could complete an isolation order independently without guidance from the MOH. Next slide. In addition to the isolation order which you've completed, you should also complete this form, which is also on SharePoint. If you isolate somebody, you're now lucky and get to write a letter to Dina Hinshaw. So this is the order to the Chief Medical Officer of Health for any isolation orders that are completed. It would also be a nice courtesy if you emailed moh.calgary@ahs.ca and gave them an FYI about any patient you isolate. Next slide. What if the patient is refusing testing or test results are pending? In this case, you must speak with the MOH and they may complete and send a certificate for detention and testing of the patient. As in all circumstances, if the patient is floridly psychotic or has suicidality, homicidality, and you form them under the Mental Health Act, then you can proceed with testing as needed. Next slide. From a legal perspective, for both the certificate of the MOH and the isolation order, the facility medical director is required to inform the patient or guardian of the reason for the apprehension and detention, the right to retain counsel, and provide them a copy of the appropriate section. With regards to sedating these patients, consent is required for all non-emergent restraint use. Given we work in an emergency department and tensions are high, we will often still be required to sedate the patients pharmacologically. Several docs have mentioned they used a Form 1 for psychotic patients, and this does remain appropriate if they meet the usual criteria. Next slide. Patients can be isolated at whichever site they present to, including the children's. If a certificate from the medical officer of health is issued, the receiving facility is specified on the certificate by the MOH. If clarification is required about isolation of a patient at your site, then call RAPID. With regards to the ASIS Hotel, just a quick reminder, some of our docs do work at the ASIS Hotel as well as in the emergency department. So for you, if a patient does leave, inform the MOH. They will complete an apprehension and detention order, and the patient will be sent to an emergency department, not back to ASIS. Isolation orders and MOH certificates should not have any role at the ASIS Hotel. Patients there must be no fixed address, swabbed, and be voluntary for admission. It can be accessed through Rapid 24 hours a day, and there is less coverage overnight, although it still exists. Pickup time will be arranged through discussion with Rapid. It's not set times of day anymore. A few questions from the emails that were sent. Pediatric patients. In most cases, they should have a guardian involved in isolation, and if the guardian and the patient are unable to do self-isolation, call Rapid and the MOH. There were several concerns raised with issues with MOH response times and practice heterogeneity. If this occurs, forward me your concerns, but the MOHs are very aware of this, and they had some challenges coming to agreements in the initial phases. The practice should be much more homogeneous and response times should be faster now. And if you ever have a question, call the MOH. In summary, the first two forms are public health forms and not mental health forms. So certificate of an MOH to apprehend and detain can only be performed by an MOH and is good for 7 days from hospital admission. The isolation order is what you will complete as an emergency physician on COVID positive patients already in the emergency department, and in some cases will require MOH guidance. The Mental Health Act Form 1 remains unchanged for its traditional indications and can be used in patients in which isolation cannot or will not happen, and there's overlying psychiatric illness or intoxication. Special thanks to Nick Etches Yahoo and Judy McDonald, who helped answer all these questions on very short notice over the past 3 days, as well as Janice Sasaki from AHS Legal and Elizabeth McKay. Now I'll pass it over to Catherine for the PPE update, and then Sean will do the moderated Q&A with Judy McDonald and Janice Sasaki. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Kelsey, for that awesome video that you showed. I'm just going to give a brief PPE update. These are as current information as I can dig up from roughly May 20th is when most of these changes occurred. As most of you may know or have heard in the newsletters or emails from Neil, we will be refit testing N95 masks for those who wear the 1870 plus model. And the reason for that is there's some insecurity in the supply chain worldwide of the 1870 plus model. Currently, AHS does have a supply of these masks, but there may be some concerns for future sourcing of these masks. So it's recommended that everybody who wears this mask be refit tested. If you are uncertain of what mask you wear, which you shouldn't be, or if you need to be refit tested, give me an email, and I do have an up-to-date list of mask types per staff member. I just wanted to include a schedule reminder of some of the drop-in fit testing at each of these sites over the next couple of weeks. There are also there are also fit testing individual champions on various shifts in emergency departments across the city, many of whom are willing to fit test emerge docs on a case-by-case basis. A number of unit clerks and nurse clinicians at many sites are certified to fit test as well. So if you need any further information about other fit testing drop-ins or individual appointments, please send me an email and I'll try to arrange something for you. Next slide, please. So not quite as exciting as Chris's Top Gun flight suit and Top Gun references, but somewhat close is our new tequila scented Micro San. I'm not sure how many of you have had the opportunity and pleasure of inhaling this hand sanitizer at 3 o'clock in the morning like I have over the night shift that I just finished. But this is our new Micro San product that some may suggest smells a bit like tequila. That's not on purpose. The reason for this is Health Canada has provided an interim approval for technical grade hand sanitizer. And there are two types of grades of hand sanitizer. I'll briefly go through that with you. I don't want to bore you with the details. There's technical grade and pharmaceutical grade ethanol as the component in hand sanitizer. Technical grade hand sanitizer may contain a higher component of impurities, such as acetaldehyde, which can give that sort of alcohol scent to the hand sanitizer. I want to assure everybody that AHS does assure that the current Microsan technical grade hand sanitizer is under the 25 parts per million exposure ceiling limit for exposure to potential acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde may reach its exposure limits through inhalation, but the inhalation component that's inhaled is minusculely small and does not approach that 25 parts per million. So suffice it to say that the exposure to these components in the new alcohol-based hand sanitizer are within safe limits. And further to that, there were some conflicting reports or information about the questionable safety in pregnant and lactating mothers. This new Microsan technical grade hand sanitizer is considered safe for use by pregnant and lactating women. If the scent is an issue, which it is for some, AHS recommends old-fashioned hand washing with soap and water as an adequate alternative to using an alcohol-based hand sanitizer. Next slide, please. Thank you, and I'll pass it on to Dr. Sean Dowling, who is now moderating questions, and I believe we have our MOH joining us in a few minutes' time as well.
Great, thank you, Catherine. Can I confirm that Dr. McDonald is on the line?
Good morning, can you hear me?
Yes, great, thank you.
I'm here.
Perfect, thanks. So I have a couple questions that you may want to jump in, as well as Chris or some of the other panelists. So the first question is with respect to the throat swabs. So the question is, anyone concerned about the number of reported cases that may be related to possible false negatives of the throat swabs? I find them hit and miss, and with some altered patients, they bite down on the stick and make it difficult to swab. Does anyone know if we're getting the nasal swabs back? So Dr. McDonald, you may have the best perspective on that.
Well, I guess, yeah, obviously it's important to get a complete sample, an accurate sample for testing. I don't know what the current status is with the labs, but I think, you know, they've been sending out regular lab bulletins to indicate what kind of testing they're doing. And I would expect that they would be the best people to ask about what's happening with NP swab supply, especially in situations where it's not easy to get an accurate or a complete throat specimen. So I could take that away and ask the medical or the director of the provincial lab, for instance, what the status is, if you'd like me to do that, and I can get back to somebody.
That would be great. Thank you very much. And there is a comment from Tom Rich saying that each department should have nasopharyngeal swabs on hand for those patients where a throat swab isn't possible. So if you have one of these patients where you can't adequately collect a throat swab, then speak to the charge nurse and they should have some of the NP swabs available. And then there's another question, I think probably best for Chris or for Dr. McDonald, is with respect to the Section 44 order, is the MOH required, do you need to speak to the MOH before filling out the Section 44 form? And what's, if yes, what happens if the patient were to leave AMA prior to that, you being able to reach the MOH and complete the form at that time? Or I guess asked another way, if there's a Section 39 form already filled out, can you fill out the Section 44 form without speaking to the MOH?
So Chris, do you want to do that, or you want me to?
Sure. You can fill, if a Section 39 is filled out, you can 100%. If a If the patient is COVID positive, has a known documented COVID positive swab and is in the emergency department, you can fill out the section 44 without speaking to the MOH.
Right. Yes, and I confirm that. So there is no need to involve the MOH in a section 44 isolation order. But if you wanted to consult with them, you certainly could. And it is important to note that a section 44 isolation order really only can be used for someone who is known positive, so has a lab report demonstrating evidence of an infectious agent, in this case COVID-19, and that would be with one physician or two physicians that certify that a person is infected with an organism. So it doesn't really have a place when you're suspecting that they have COVID. You have to know to use a 44 isolation order.
And is there a time limit on that? If they're, extreme example, if their COVID swab was positive 3 weeks ago, is that irrelevant, or is it need to have been collected within a certain time frame?
Well, that's a good question. The Public Health Act is meant to deal with individuals that may be an infectious risk or putting others at risk, right? So the question is, if they were positive 3 weeks ago, they're probably not infectious any longer. So wouldn't be a concern, wouldn't need to be isolated.
Great, thank you. And then there's a follow-up question to that. If we have if we're only suspecting COVID, we haven't confirmed it, we don't have the legal rights to hold the patient. And I think, again, going back to Chris's point earlier, these are the situations where you need to speak to the MOH to get that further guidance, or two physicians can complete that form if an MOH is not able to be contacted in a timely fashion. Is that correct?
I would like to just comment that if you've got someone in the emergency department and you're suspecting that they have COVID and they're refusing to be tested, then by all means you should be getting in touch with the MOH and should be able to reach them in a timely manner, because in that circumstance, the MOH can do a certificate, a Section 39 certificate, which it doesn't, the apprehension part isn't applicable, but the detention and testing and physical exam part is. And so that is a mechanism for getting them tested without their consent. I don't know how feasible that is if they're really adamant about not being tested, but that is a mechanism to get them tested. Sorry, that Form 3, once it's issued, if you've got the person already at the hospital, that Form 3 is in place for 7 days from the date of admission to hospital. So that gives time to get the test result, and then at that point, you can determine whether further steps are needed, like an isolation order, or if the test is negative, actually you have to let them go.
Right, but yeah, and there's turnaround time obviously for the test, so we'd have to make that decision in conjunction with the MOH based on what our pretest probability for COVID is at that point.
Yeah, right.
Okay, let me quickly scroll through the rest of the questions. Right now, I don't see any other questions other than a reiteration that throat swabs appear to be the main tool that we have going forward, although nasopharyngeal swabs are available in a limited fashion for those patients we can't collect a throat swab on. And one other question came up from Joe, was with respect to people who can't do the qualitative fit testing. There's limited availability of the quantitative testing, and Catherine opened up her email there to contact her if you need quantitative testing for your mask. Okay, so with no further questions, I'll send it back to Stu to finish this up.
Alrighty, thank you very much, Sean, and yet again, thank you to everybody who took part today. Please, can we have the next slide, please, Aaron? Okay, so I'd just like to formally thank all the panelists. Looks like we're wrapping up in a bit of a better time today. Please keep sending us your questions. We are going to we're not going to have updates every week, but we are going to have further updates. So if there's anything particularly of interest to you that you think we're not addressing that we need to get to, please let us know, either by emailing me, emailing Sean, or any of the working group. And then we will we'll address that within the next couple of weeks. So thank you very much for your time. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to Aaron PLP for organizing this as well.
Sure. Can you guys hear me now?
Okay, there you go. Colin, yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
Just one thing about Form 3. So the Form 3, you technically have to inform the facility medical director at your site, because we have to let the patient know about the Form 3 process. So it's a bit of a challenge, but ideally, if you have a patient come in under a Form 3, you should email the facility medical director at your site. So that's Peter Jameson at Foothills, Elizabeth McKay at the Lougheed, Kelly D'Souza at Rockview, and then myself at South Health Campus. And again, it's part of the Public Health Act. We have to then inform the patient they're under Form 3 and let them know of their legal right to challenge the form. So it's a bit of a technicality. Most patients, I don't think, would take the time to actually challenge the form, but it is one thing that's required in the Public Health Act. So something to keep in mind.
And Colin, with that, so that's the Form 39 from the MOH. If the patient comes in,
right,
has the form, then we at what kind of any time of night and day need to
just send us an email. So we're supposed to get an email from the MOH saying that we've completed this form. They will be delivered to your facility. Please inform them of the process when they arrive. The problem is it can take days or weeks to find these patients. And so when they arrive, we often don't know. So the admitting physician or the emergency physician, if they can send an email, then like I said, as part of the legal process, we have to inform the patient that they're under that form. And then
is that the same with the Form 44 with the isolation order that we complete?
I don't think that one's different because the physician is doing it themselves. We do this on behalf of the MOH. So for the Form 5, the 44, we don't have to be involved in that. It's only the Form 3, that's Section 39.
Colin, it's Judy. Just to clarify, there are specific responsibilities for the facility medical director for an isolation order too. So I think it's important that if one is issued by some physician at your facility, that they get in touch with you, because you still have to let the individual know why they're being isolated and what their recourse is for appeal. So you do have responsibilities no matter whether it's a certificate or an isolation order.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah, and I would just, sorry, Colin, I would just add for the Form 3, I would hope that the medical director is never surprised when someone that the MOH has written a Section 39 order on shows up at their facility. There should always be some communication. Either, I understand from my colleagues in Calgary that they don't always have time to phone, but there should be some communication ahead of time so that you know that this individual is coming, if they can be found by police, to be brought into your facility. So it should never be a surprise, but these are surprising times. So
no, and it did happen the other day at our site where another physician in the ED was talking about this patient they admitted under a Form 3. Now they hadn't been through the process before, and again, these things tend to slip through the cracks, and so I wasn't aware, the physician wasn't aware, so just wanted to bring it up that it's part of the process. Obviously, it's new to everyone, but we want to make sure we get it right.
Indeed.
Okay, so just to clarify then, we need to email you either for the 44 or the 39 at any time when we see these patients.
Yeah, and helpful to let the patient know that they have a legal right to challenge it as well. We would do that ourselves, but it is good at the time that the patient is being detained to let them know of their legal rights.
And document that in the chart, I'm assuming, because I'm sure the patient won't remember that.
That would be fantastic.
Okay.
I think it sounds like an opportunity for us to create a one-pager in terms of what this process looks like, who we need to inform for these Section 39 and Section 44 forms, and we could sort of put together and have that available on the website and maybe even on SharePoint, because there's a little bit of nuance here that we should clarify.
Sounds good. Yeah, we will do that. Alrighty. So with that, I think if anybody, does anybody else have anything to add at this point? All right, so we're going to wrap that up. Thank you very much to everybody. Thanks to Judy for joining us, and thanks to Colin for joining us as well. All right, thank you. Goodbye.